Good morning, everyone. Jim Clarke here at the Synchronicity Sanctuary to share another contemplative focus with you. And the focus I want to share with you today is grace, the finite experience of infinite possibility. In the human experience, there are cycles of relative awareness. When we first began our journey as a human being, many lives ago in my case, our experience is dominated by the negative polarity. We are very limited and confined to the ego and our mind as the all and everything of our experience. We are a separate human being from everything and everyone outside of our own bodies. So, as we go through this experience, which is dominantly fear-based, and we are restricted to the efforts to survive and to become a part of whatever we're born into, the society, the culture, and so forth, and to adapt to the physical surroundings that we also encounter, and so forth and so on. And that's our life. We're just simply trying to make an ego the ultimate reality and make it successful. And as we go through this lifetime after lifetime, we consistently experience utter failure, of course, because sooner or later, because the human experience is finite, it has a beginning, it has an end. And no matter what we do, eventually we must face the fact that what we experience as ourselves is not going to last. And we don't know what comes next. So we go into belief systems about God and about being good and being bad and being worthy and unworthy and so forth and so on. And this is pretty much what the human experience is all about until you go through enough lifetimes to build up your experience in the negative polarity to a point where it becomes extreme. And once any polarity comes to its extreme, it shifts to the opposite, the positive polarity. And at this point in the human experience, this is where we have our what we call awakening experience. Something, someone, or some circumstance triggers an awakening in us, and we suddenly become aware that there's much more to us than meets the eye, more than we ever known before. This is a very powerful moment in our lives. I know it certainly was for me in this lifetime. And once you have that experience, then you're shifting your human experience is now going from the finite to the infinite, because you get a glimpse of the infinite you as consciousness in some form or other, and then the mystery begins. You have the experience, but you still don't know much about it. You've had many lifetimes where you've suffered through an ego that was born and lives and dies, huh? And now you're woken up to something that's seemingly infinite and seemingly extremely blissful, much more happiness and contentment and fulfillment than you've ever experienced as a human being. So the pursuit begins and the mystery unravels itself slowly as you go through your pursuit to figure out how can you keep that experience that was so uplifting and so beautiful and so powerful. How can you maintain something like that? That was my experience when I first had my awakening experience, prior to which I had no clue. I had met people, various forms of mastery encountered in my life before that moment. I sensed something, but I didn't really know. It wasn't something that I had integrated into my experience and had become familiar with. But I never had the experience that matched my awakening experience, wherein I went from a human being to something completely non-physical and not even in form. No form, yet there I was existing and extremely blissful in that experience. So that just turned my world upside down. This is usually what happens in the human experience. And at that point in your lifetime, in your human journey, this is where you start to venture away from what you have known before. And it's usually a little bit awkward for a person in the beginning because your friends, your family, whatever, has known you as the ego that you were being, and now all of a sudden you're confronted with who you woke up to versus the ego that you have always been. And you have to somehow integrate and adapt to both worlds. You must maintain your ego, of course, without which you don't have a human experience. But in one way or another, you must pursue that journey, because the pull to get back to that blissful being that you experienced in your awakening experience is too strong to ignore. And I mean, everybody's after that ultimately. Every pleasure that you seek as a human being, even though you may not have the awareness of who you truly are, is an attempt to regain that experience, the truth of who you are, which is absolute bliss. So, and this is also known as grace. This is the term grace when people have an aha moment, when they wake up and they get blissed out with a moment of awareness. This is the grace, that what grace really means. It means you've been given an insight into your true nature, into what we call the spiritual nature, okay? So once you have that experience and you start to pursue it, first of all, you need some way to pursue it, and that was my first challenge. I did have a little bit of very little knowledge of meditation prior to my awakening experience, but I had never really meditated before. I wasn't drawn into that kind of a discipline strong enough until I had the experience of being blissful consciousness. Once I did, that was all I wanted, because that fulfilled me like nothing else ever came close to. And that contrast is a driving force inside yourself from that moment on. And it's usually in this time period in your own evolution that you start to look for a teacher. You look for somebody, and somebody will show up, because that's when you're ready to listen to and experience a teacher, a guru, a master, whatever. And that's what brought me to my master here at Synchronicity Foundation. Prior to that experience, I wasn't ready for that, to give myself to the teaching of a master. I didn't even know really what that was. But as I slowly brought myself to that experience by meditating and gaining more and more balance within myself, and growing my positive polarity experience and becoming more and more blissful, more balanced, more capable of dealing with mental and emotional ups and downs, and as the extremes of my thinking and my feeling and my living experiences began to kind of even out more and more, because I was withdrawing from the things and the experiences that would create that kind of a up and down experience, where one moment you're very happy, the next moment you're miserable, and where everything in life is dramatic, and you're afraid of pretty much everything. You're constantly on your guard to try to keep yourself surviving and maintaining whatever comfort level you can. Well, once I started to meditate, that began to even out more and more and more. And as that did, my pull towards ultimate fulfillment still was very, very strong. There was still more to get, and consistency in that experience, in the bliss of being, was what I was really after. That's what people really want once they have an awakening experience. And to get there, something has to be in your life strong enough that entrains you to that truth of who you are. Because the situation that you're in, even though you may not realize it, is that your ego and all the identifications that you have created around the ego and your attachments to that as you are slowly being challenged by the fact that you're experiencing something that's beyond the ego. It's beyond the mind. It's not something that you can conceptually deal with or understand. You can read about it like I did. I read many, many books about it, and watch videos or listen to tapes about people who are teaching such, like Alan Watts and so forth. But that was great, and there was something about it that I really liked, but it wasn't fulfilling in and of itself. Once you got through reading a book or watching a video, you had to go back to your life, and there you were, there I was, being Jim Clarke, a human being with his limitations, his fears, and all of his conditions that he tried to maintain, right? Because that was what I was taught to do through my life. That was how everybody around me existed, and that was how I existed too, and no question about it, until that awakening experience, of course. But it takes time for you to develop that awareness about the process that has been initiated from an awakening experience, where you shift suddenly from a dominant negative polarity to moving farther and farther into the positive polarity of the experience of who you are. And as you continue to go through this process, challenges come up, and your interpretation of those challenges, I know my interpretation of those challenges was basically, what did I do wrong? Maybe I really messed up, and now my chances to become fully awakened are gone. And I went through some of those experiences, of course, not realizing that every experience I had after that awakening moment was perfectly appropriate. It was bringing me where I had to go to fulfill my journey and develop consistency in the experience of the truth of who I am, as opposed to a moment here and a moment there, and then struggling with my ego after that because of the contrast in experience. One's fear based, one is based on truth and blissful being. So you want the blissful being. Once you get a taste of it, it's the ultimate experience in the human experience, right? So you want to keep it, you want to maintain it, and you want it to be happening in your experience every moment of your life. And in the pursuit of that, you encounter many, many obstacles, which is just really you maintaining your attachments to who you thought you were prior to your awakening and prior to beginning meditation and living a holistic lifestyle. When I first started off, my lifestyle was anything but holistic, and it was not based on meditation or anything concerned with awareness. It was simply the moment to moment journey of trying to maintain a life that was tolerable and that had some gratification to it. And that was it. And that was what everyone I knew was about too. None of us were aware of anything outside of that experience. Now that I had an awakening experience and I was trying to get into that experience as a constant, I was drawn to things that none of my friends were even interested in. So I pretty much parted way with that life and the people who were living it, trying to maintain some kind of continuity with them. Not, I didn't really disown them or judge them. I just knew that I had to go places where they weren't going to go. So I did, and I kind of went off and moved. I remember I moved away from where I was living because right there I had a chance to kind of isolate myself from the context that I knew so well, and that was a very good move because then I was more open and more available to pursue my meditations and to pursue my journey as an awakened human being and try to grow that experience and to substantiate that experience. And eventually, after maybe 10 years of attempting to do this on my own, I finally came to the conclusion or realization rather that it just didn't seem to go far enough for me. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what kind of a meditation system I used, and no matter how much I meditated, I could go so far, and that seemed to be about it. And then the inconsistencies in my experience were always present. I would be blissful one moment, and then wondering why it wasn't blissful the next, and tossing myself back and forth and not really understanding that process until I discovered Synchronicity Foundation and the high-tech meditation that they offered. That was it. But once I did try that meditation system out, I had a sample tape back in those days, and I tried it out, and the moment I did, I was immediately drawn to it. One reason is because the master who created that system, is a master that I had journeyed with in prior lifetimes. Secondly, it was so much more efficient, and my meditations were so much more consistent, and always brought me to a level of experience closer and closer to what I was looking for. And so naturally I signed up and I started using the high-tech meditation, the recognitions program, and just kept it up because there was nothing better that I had found to that point. And eventually I was invited to attend a program here at Synchronicity, which was a whole new journey for me. I was living on the West Coast, Synchronicity's on the East Coast or close to the East Coast. And so it really demanded that I make a big choice at that moment in my life, and yet my desire to go further into the truth of who I am was so strong, I was ready to say yes to that experience. And once I did, and once I experienced my teacher in person and the energy here at the sanctuary, that was it. I knew that that's where I wanted to be. And yet there was still this ego and still my identification with it that would come into play here and there. And that was an interesting experience because I didn't quite know how to deal with my ego anymore. It was there and I had to be with it, but the mind, of course, jumps into the picture and it wants to judge this or that. It wants to be afraid of this or that. It's the mind and the ego are always trying to maintain the status that they had in your life. And so stories are generated around that to try to get you to pull away from that lifestyle in order to be normal again. Huh? And it sometimes seems very, very tempting because the challenges when you take a meditative lifestyle are many. You're constantly processing the experiences you get in your meditations, and that processing means you have to clear out all the data that's in you that you're holding on to that's incongruent with what you experience when you meditate. You're going into a state of being that your ego can't go to. And so your ego wants to reassert itself and will try very much to do so. And so it's not like you just have a moment and you're awakened and that's it. So it's a process, and it's a long process, usually, at least in my case. And it's just one you give yourself to because you know that ultimately it's going to lead you to a much better, shall we say, space, a much better experience of life as a human being than you ever had before. And indeed, that's what I'm experiencing today. And that's why I'm doing these live streams and why I want to share in some form or other my experience with regard to these contemplative focuses that I'm sharing with you to help encourage people to and make people more at ease with the process of meditation and more open to it, because there's so much you can gain from it. And that's really it. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. And I'm going to be taking a break for the next 3 weeks. We have a program coming up and we're going to be preparing for that program. And so I'm going to take a break until I think it's October 27th. Let me just check my calendar here real quick. It's going to be the last Monday of this month as far as I can tell. So until then, I wish you well, and I hope you enjoy your journey as a human being and come to a greater understanding and acceptance of the challenges that you are meeting in that. So until next time, I bid you adieu, and I will see you then. Thank you so much for watching.